now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Jesse Simonton of the Surrender Cobra on Substack. Jesse, let's start with the guy that we were texting about the other day. The guy that was on last week's show, Shane Beamer. He, I think, is in a very unique spot because he knows very well he's going to show up on all these hot seat lists. But at the same time, his situation is unique in that he has an ideal guy to be able to build around on the offensive side of the ball, an ideal guy to be able to build around on the defensive side of the ball. What do you make of his current spot and understanding that there are probably a lot of people that are assuming that he's a dead man walking?
Well, Shane is going to be unabashedly Shane, which is he's going to be extremely confident. He's going to be, the worthness is through the roof. I mean, he believes, I think he just kind of wants to manifest, greatness or hope. And so the fact that, what was it? End of November off this miserable season. He's sitting there at the press conference podium saying, like, we're going to be a playoff team in 2026. And I think it's kind of silly for him to say that. But then at the same time, it costs him nothing because he knows the reality. He knows the scorecard and that maybe not a playoff berth, but if South Carolina doesn't win 8, 9 games in the fall, Shane Beamer is going to be looking for a new job. He's going to be coaching at East Carolina, not South Carolina. And I do think it's kind of been an inauspicious off season for them, mainly through no fault of Shane Beamer's. He did everything he could to retain this roster. You get Lenora Sellers back, who was a disappointment. You make another offensive coordinator hire. I do think that's a bit of a red flag that you keep having to recycle through these coordinators because you can't get it right. But I think Kendall Briles, I think we both agree, Kendall Briles is an upgrade over who they had a year ago. And then you get Dylan Stewart to come back. The fact that they reloaded so hard on the offensive line only to see their starting left tackle be sidelined for the injury. And there's, I guess, optimism that the big transfer from NC State, hopefully, fingers crossed, toss the salt shaker over your shoulder, that hopefully he's going to be ready by week 1. That's just huge. I mean, that's just, you're already kind of starting behind the 8 ball. And then when you have these two big chips potentially down from your weakest positional unit a year ago, that I think largely was responsible for many of South Carolina's pitfalls. I just think it's going to be that South Carolina's facing an uphill battle. You see the over under, these way too early win totals. They're sitting at right around 6.5. So Vegas sees them as basically a fringe bowl team. I don't think that's going to be good enough for Shane to come back in 27. But we'll see. He certainly has surprised folks before. He's done it. It's been an every other year deal, but every other year, he's been not Will Muschamp.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And I think the energy is certainly different with Shane and the way that he has approached things. And with Muschamp, the quarterback stuff just became such an obvious limiter of their ceiling year in, year out, knowing that he probably wasn't going to get that decision right. But, this is something that faces Shane. It faces a lot of coaches in college football right now. In order to be considered a great coach in this sport, you eventually need to accomplish one thing. You need to deliver when expectations are high. It can't always be proving doubters wrong, because if there are doubters, then you've probably come up short at some point. You've given them reason to doubt you. And that's the biggest thing that I think that is in his way. And it's going to be in his way, even if this is an 8 or a 9 win season, even if this is a bounce back year for South Carolina. Like, why is it that so many of those guys, it feels like they are stuck in that spot? And I think like Beamer is probably the best example of it that we have in the sport right now.
Well, there's also this kind of, I think, distillation or issue where fans still in this, I think, new era of college football haven't recalibrated in their brain that like 9-3 or 8-4 is digestible. They're still existing in this world where you have to have double digit wins. You have to go 11-1. And so then when you break that down for a situation like Shane, where South Carolina, I think their fan expectations already outsize what the reality of that situation is. If you go 8-4 at South Carolina, you're doing pretty good considering their history. When you look back, I mean, I think there's been one coach in South Carolina history that has not been fired and actually left for another job. I mean, you're talking about a long time program that no coach has been able to kind of, parlay that into another, and that just shows the reality of how difficult that job is. Now, when you add the fact that South Carolina is going to be playing in a 9-game SEC schedule plus Clemson, Shane is just kind of up against it where it's just tough that, again, reality versus expectations. I think you see the 6.5 number and you say, if South Carolina goes 7-5, all right, Shane's probably done a pretty good job, but that's just not what fans want or expect.
Let's talk about Jon Sumrall because I think that there are a lot of opinions already out about him. How would you assess his first couple of months so far by being able to keep a lot of key guys with Jaden Baugh, Jaden Woods, Fernell Brown III, Dallas Wilson, like hiring two established power conference coordinators? You're able to do a lot of these things that felt like early boxes to check. How would you assess the job that he's done, knowing that he's also very much acknowledged the shortcomings of his predecessor?
He has, and it's funny because he's a Spitfire. Obviously, he's a fire-breathing dragon in some regards, and he has not been shy about the fact that he is not Billy Napier. And I do think it's funny that when Jon Sumrall was hired, because Florida fans were so enamored with Lane Kiffin, there was this huge just like wet fart when they hired him. And then he goes up there and kills the opening press conference, and every Florida fan's like ready to go, like uh ready to go battle cry behind him like it's Braveheart, ready to fight for him. So the fact that he isn't Billy Napier is, I think, a big check in his box. I think what's fascinating about John, from my perspective, especially when you compare it to another first year head coach in the SEC, is just how he's kind of approached this build at Florida, both from the roster and staff standpoint, compared to Alex Golesh at Auburn.
Yeah.
Golesh, was recently on Josh Pate's podcast or show, and kind of talked about loyalty and kind of how he has, this loyalty with these guys that have been in the foxhole with him, both from a player and assistant's perspective. Alex Golesh basically took like a Greyhound bus of dudes and coaches and staff and off-field staffers and whatever from Tampa, and just put them on a bus to Auburn, Alabama. Summerall basically did the opposite. You could fill up an Uber XL with the guys he took from Tulane. He brought a couple of coaches who, notably, he then made them reclimb the ladder. His OC at Tulane is now just the quarterback's coach. His defensive coordinator is now just the linebackers coach. He took two players. I think Golesh took like 13 or 14 USF players. Summerall took two guys, and they're a punter and a kicker off a really good, American team, a team that won the American a year ago. There's folks all over the country are trying to poach these G5 teams. And yet Sumrall was in the building and said, I don't think these guys are good enough to be in the SEC. He has also, not on Pate, but elsewhere, has made some interesting comments about what loyalty means to him. So I think it's noteworthy, like you said, that he goes and gets a Buster Faulkner. Why? I think that's a direct shot at Georgia. They're trying to take a shot that no coach has kind of been better, I think, the last couple seasons at frustrating Kirby Smart's defense with someone. It's a little Mickey Mousey, 100%. It's a little, Mickey Mousey in terms of all the motion and kind of, quick screens, just kind of almost like a putt-putt deal, but it stresses your defense. And so you do that, then you, like you said, you're able to retain basically the fight. They went 5 for 5, retaining their best 5 players. You kind of basically challenge a former blue chip quarterback in DJ Lagley that, hey, I'd love to have you back, but you're going to compete for the job. It's not just going to be yours. And then when Lagley leaves, it almost kind of, I think, emboldens Sumrall even more to be like, hey, we're not giving out handouts here. This is you're going to come here and you're going to compete. So I don't actually believe that Aaron Philo is in a real quarterback competition. I think Buster Faulkner, chose him for, he was kind of the handpicked guy for a reason. We'll see. I'm not ruling out Trammell. We'll see, but I would be surprised if Philo didn't get the job. Then you add in, Singleton. I think Jaden Ball might be the best running back in the SEC, maybe even the country next season. I like what Florida has. It's, they had a Saturday's problem, kind of like their rival to the South, frankly, before Cristobal figured it out a year ago. They had a Saturday's problem. That roster that Napier built is solid to very good. Sumrall's now added a little bit to that out of the portal. It would not surprise me if they, won 9 or 10 games. They're going to have to catch some breaks to win that many. But there's a reason why that number, again, we talk about preseason odds, that number's hanging at around 7-5, 8. The best regular season they had under Billy Napier was 7 wins. So Vegas is already saying, hey, that's the floor with this new guy.
What's interesting, Jesse, is that there's this weird year one thing at Florida in recent memory amidst all this turnover that they've had at head coach. But, you know, look at these past three year one coaches at Florida, where McElwain gets to an SEC championship year one. He's got the great start with Will Grier, until he gets suspended. Mullen gets to and wins a New Year's Six bowl, and then Billy, yes, he's 6-7, but he gets that Utah win in the opener, and Anthony Richardson looks like he's God's gift to the quarterback position, and they get all the way up to number 12 in the country, and it's the highest AP ranking that he gets during his time in Gainesville. Is maybe the perspective that we should have for year one of Sumrall just simply, if he succeeds early, let's just exhale. Let's just exhale, because I don't want to jump to conclusions with what awaits, knowing that this is going to be a really fluid process throughout his time there.
For certain. I was a beat writer. That was my last year as a beat writer at the Miami Herald for the Gators in McElwain's. Actually, no, I did his. So I did his next year too, because I went to both of the. He went to SEC championships back-to-back games, basically on the back of Muschamp's defensive players, because the offense was never that great, aside from a couple of games before Will Grier got popped for PEDs. And then Mullen. To your point about Sumrall, I think another reason why we may have to just hit pause is that, let's say they have a really solid season this year. They go 9-3. The offense, has some fireworks and pizzazz with all these skill players we talk about coming back. If that's the case, there's a very strong possibility that Buster Faulkner is going to be a head coach in the ACC or elsewhere next year. And then you're doing the real test, the litmus test of, okay, Jon, you built a nice staff. How deep is that Rolodex? You went out and got the number one guy you wanted as OC. Who's the next guy? Are you just going to promote the guy that you said, all right, I didn't think you were worthwhile to be at a year ago. I'm going to make you my quarterbacks coach. You're going to put him back at the OC, or do you have somebody else, on the defensive side, a Brad White that you went out and got who was available? So that's going to be a real test, to your point of, just because 2026 may be successful for Florida, that does not necessarily guarantee that this is some sort of long-term deal, as we have seen for the last 10, 15 years with the Gators.
It's like the Dan Lanning thing that I think he knocked out of the park, where
sure.
you know that if your OC does well, he's getting an opportunity. Kenny Dillingham gets the opportunity, and then boom, he discovers Will Stein, and Will Stein becomes this revelation for that Oregon offense that's just been set it and forget it these last couple of years, the last 3 years, really. So yeah, I am fascinated to see what it would look like and how you're able to handle that. What does it mean for his long-term success? It seems,
and to your point about Dan Lanning, I don't want to interrupt, but to your point, the reason why I even have optimism that he's got this next one right, where he did just actually promote from within, is that A, he has shown us a track record. That's a strong deal to kind of, bank on. And B, I don't think Dante Moore comes back if he doesn't believe in the guy who's going to be calling the offense in 2026. True. So, I think there's kind of a hand in glove fit there, where if the number one quarterback prospect is going to say, hey, I'll turn down the NFL, I think if his position coach sucks, he's probably not going to do that.
That's such an interesting thing too. Now that's happening more and more as these staffs are getting expanded, and there's a lot more of like the offensive analyst role that gets promoted to OC. And you saw it play out with Bobo. You saw it play out at South Carolina, albeit with different results. But yeah, and a head coach kind of weighing that option of like, hey, my quarterback is saying I've got a good rapport with this guy. Maybe I should do this. Oh no, that's the loyalty element that we talk about with Sumrall. Maybe I do need to make this a national search and kind of look and see what we got. It seems like Kirby and Mario Cristobal taking aim at Florida is, in doing so at the Spurrier dinner, where it's kind of a roast. Everybody's kind of having fun with it. Sumrall gets kind of lumped in with that. Whether that's fair or not remains to be seen. But this is something like Matt Hayes wrote about for USA Today. It might not be that long for him to take those jokes and just kind of roll with it. And I do wonder if he has that in his back pocket. But what type of season gets Florida out of the butt of the joke status? Is it simply performing better in those national spotlight games? Because I think there's a lot of interpretation, even if they do go 7-5 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I think a lot of the chagrin to Florida fans does hinge on the fact that Georgia, while they have maybe disappointed nationally in terms of the playoffs the last two seasons, they've still won the SEC in back-to-back years, and they have basically totally dominated the league in the last, 5 or 6 calendar seasons. Dating back to Kirby Smart's tenure at Georgia, I think it was other than the very first season, or the one Dan Mullen game, excuse me. They've dominated. Georgia's just dominated that series. And while Florida's been, kind of, Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football the last two seasons, I think, in that rivalry, they've come close, but they haven't won. I think winning that game, if Florida goes 7-5, but they beat Georgia, I think a lot of fans would say, "Hey, we got the right guy." Now, if you go 8-4 and you get your teeth kicked in again, and I think it's not in Jacksonville this year. I guess it's in Atlanta because they're renovating the
So
stadium.
weird.
I don't know why they're just not playing these games on campus like they did in the mid '90s when they were doing that. But yeah, it's just ridiculous. So that I do think a lot of it hinges on that Florida and Florida fans so badly want to be able to kind of bite back in that rivalry, so to speak.
This was, I think, a historic coaching carousel. All the big time vacancies that we got, you wrote and covered a lot of this stuff, and you can go in so many different ways with it. I don't think that the post 2026 cycle will be quite like that, but if we were handicapping this for Vegas, the favorite for biggest vacancy for the post 2026 cycle would be Florida State. I think that's kind of the obvious one. And then there's definitely some intrigue with USC, with Tennessee, maybe Alabama, Clemson, and perhaps a few others. I'll let you pick first and I'll pick second. What do you think will be the biggest vacancy after the 2026 season?
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go USC.
Mm,
I think that again, when we talk about expectations versus reality, when you look at their win total, Vegas is saying, "Hey, I think they're maybe an 8 or a 9 win team," whereas Lincoln Riley's talking about this being a championship outfit. USC fans are expecting and outright, demanding the fact that they need to make the playoff. This is what year 5, and they still haven't made the playoff. I know it's a lot of money there, and it could be one of those situations where maybe Lincoln just exits stage left and goes and finds a nice landing spot elsewhere. But it would not surprise me at all if USC becomes the biggest opening, especially if the season starts off tough. I mean, they got some tough games on that slate.
well, much to Lincoln Riley's chagrin. If he had it his
Right?
way, it would just be nothing but
Yeah,
FCS teams. Yeah, the Danton Lynn move probably needs to be part of that context. Danton
for
Lynn
sure.
going from USC to Penn State, where look, I think that moves like that happen sometimes. Jeff Levy leaving Ole Miss for Oklahoma for the same role. All right, sometimes that stuff happens. When a guy has total autonomy on that side of the ball, and he's considered an actual asset to what you're doing. And maybe like there are USC fans that would push back and say, oh, the defense was disappointing. It wasn't disappointing by Lincoln Riley standards. Okay. Like it just wasn't. And that guy goes for a new place like that in the conference. I think that's just kind of alarming. Like that's usually not a good sign for a coach.
Yeah, and USC fans have totally poo-pooed it by being like, "Well, that's his alma mater." Okay, that's it. You know
Still,
what? You know what? Like, if he looked at the situations and said, "All right, USC just signed the #1 recruiting class. He has single-handedly helped basically rebuild that defensive side of the ball the last couple seasons, where they have some nice pieces coming back. They did lose the big defensive lineman to Alabama, but they got some nice pieces. They brought in some portal guys." I agree. I mean, I think it's a huge red flag. And then it's a double, you can add another flag when you say, hey, his replacement is Gary Patterson, I know Gary Patterson knows a ton about defense, but he's been on the sidelines for a while. I don't know. And then all these USC fans keep talking about this #1 recruiting class like they're going to get contributions from 20 freshmen this year.
sure.
I mean, yeah. I mean, come on. So I'm highly skeptical. I love the receiver they got from NC State. I think he's going to be a really nice replacement for Lane, but they're going to miss, Makai. I mean, Makai Lemon's going to be a top 10, 15 pick in an NFL draft. And yeah, I have some real concerns about USC. You named a bunch of schools that I think you could circle. And I think one particularly that you named is very interesting, but I'd like, let's see where you go next.
I'm going Notre Dame. I'm
Notre
going
Dame. So not even one that you named.
not even one that I named.
Not even one of you named. So you got so that is a he goes to the NFL.
Yes.
This is they went the so I mean like I if I was making a preseason top 25 right now, I'd put Notre Dame number one.
I'd be okay with that.
Would you have them as your preseason favorite or
I would definitely put them in that early conversation. Seeing this morning Bill Connolly percentage of returning production, having Notre Dame at number one, last year's Clemson, make of that what you will. I think Marcus Freeman, in the way that he's constructed this roster, a little bit different than the way that Clemson constructed theirs.
and the staff?
Yeah, like here's what I come back to. I think the NFL stuff's real. I do. I think that any head coach, and maybe there's an example that I'm missing here, any head coach that's tweeting in late December, Notre Dame, let's run it back. I'm like, what? Wait, what is this a guy deciding between going to the NFL draft? And then the stuff that happened at the high school wrestling meet, even though he was exonerated, whatever you want to call it, I don't even know if that's the right word for this situation, or there's like false claims, just weird. And it's weird that it played out the way that it did. It's weird that his name kept being linked to all those different jobs where like this team thinks that they have a real chance. I think there is real appeal with someone who is 40 years old, who knows that if it doesn't work out in the NFL for 3 years, and I'm usually not this guy, I'm usually the guy that's like, look, they're not going to the NFL, that we need to like just chill with some of that stuff. We get way too excited about this. He's 40. He has time to fail in the NFL and come back to college and still get a premier job. And I do think that there could be a path for him if they don't, either if they win a national championship and he can do the Harbaugh thing and just kind of go out, albeit under some different circumstances. He could do that. Or if it ends up coming up just short, CJ Carr is going to be off to the NFL. They're going to lose a lot of talent from this team. And he's just like, this is my time. I kind of need to do it and strike while the iron's hot. So that might be a little bit controversial, but I'll go.
No, I like it. I like it. I'll say this of these three. Which one would surprise you the most? If I gave you named Clemson, and that's going to be an awkward. What is it? The cocktail line. Everything ends badly, otherwise it wouldn't end. I mean, that's like we may get that situation with Dabo there. But which one would surprise you the most? Clemson, Texas. With
Oh,
all the pressure they have, Arch is gone. They've got that. I mean, this is an all-in season. If Sark doesn't, if they don't make the playoffs, I think that's 100% on the table. And then Oklahoma.
Oklahoma is interesting because we know Brent Venables will have a new job. God, Oklahoma fans are sick of hearing me say this. It's win the breakup stuff. It's still win the breakup. You don't want to fire Brent Venables before Lincoln Riley gets fired. Like it's kind of like as silly as that might sound. I do think that actually matters. Getting to the playoff is going to be really important. They have a lot of experience returning on that offense, but I don't think that would be probably the first. I don't think Oklahoma or Texas are eager to make that move, and understanding just the situation with the bosses, I think is important with Tennessee. I think Danny White having 4 different contracts that he has changed for Josh Heupel and 4 different corrections where he's essentially sweetened the deal either with a base pay raise or with an extension. I think that's important too, even though I'm not immune to what a 6-6 season would do for those optics. So I think Florida State is probably more imminent than those others, just because look,
100%.
the buyout's always going to suck. Like you're just
Right.
not going to get away from that at any time soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that list of Florida State, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Maryland. I mean, I would be surprised if honestly, I'd be surprised if all 4 of those schools didn't have new coaches, in 27. But the Tennessee one is interesting because the quarterback, the way the quarterback situation has kind of played out has certainly been frustrating for Vol fans. The way the season ended a year ago, getting your teeth kicked in against, in-state rival Vanderbilt, then losing the bowl game. They've certainly made the investment from a staff perspective, bringing in Jim Knowles, poaching Indiana's strength and conditioning coordinator. But if they don't get the quarterback position right and they're going to be starting a first-year starter, it's gonna be an uphill climb to make the college football playoff. I think I did the research for at Surrender Cobra earlier this spring that I think it's like I don't want to misquote myself. I think it's like 3 or 4 teams out of the 24 that have made the playoffs with a first year starter, and that was like Julian Sayin. It's those sorts of guys, not guys that are a little less, a little less aplomb, I guess.
Yeah, like Curtis Rourke at Indiana, like that.
Yeah.
Technically, first. Well, I guess he's not a first year starter because he was a starter at Ohio, but like first year at a specific school. Like how does that's there's probably a lot of room for interpretation there. I'll just probably link Brian Kelly to like all of these second tier jobs. I'm realizing when you said Wisconsin, I'm like, oh yeah, that's another job I can link him to. Northwestern, I can link him to that one. Boston College, when that inevitably opens up,
Oh
I can link
yeah.
him to that one too. That just makes a lot of sense. It's weird. The SEC has never been younger at head coach, and yet Kurt Signetti just won a national title at 64. And this is a sport that has not had a 30 something coach win a national title since Danny Ford in 1981 at
Wow.
Clemson, which go figure, he's only 13 years older than Signetti, which is that's just a bizarro world stat. And then in basketball, Dan Wetzel had this tweet where it's
I
like,
saw that. All the old guys.
yeah, you have 5 coaches that are 67 and older who are in the Sweet 16, 4 of which are 70 and older. Like, hire the right person. I get that. I say it all the time. But should big revenue college sports just be more open to the idea of hiring an older candidate, knowing like your roster retention shorter, you're not recruiting these guys for like 4 or 5 years, you're trying to get these guys for like 1 to 2 years now for the majority of your roster anyways. Like, does it make sense? Like, should we just be more open minded to a 60 something coach stepping in as long as they're willing to adapt in this day and age?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly, as long as I think these coaches have shown the chops to kind of navigate the new landscape of sport X, whether we're talking about college basketball, college football, whatever. I mean, Calipari has had to make adjustments, and Patino's made adjustments, and uh, Kurt Signetti just showed us that if you can be the best, I think, modern talent evaluator, and you have the backing of your you know big chested Indiana Hoosier boosters, that you can do some things. And this season is going to be fascinating for Indiana to see. All right, we knew how good Kurt was at evaluating what he had at JMU to believe, all right, these guys could then mesh with these guys at Indiana, and we build this behemoth. Now going into the portal and getting some more kind of flashy and shiny names, how does that work? Does the sprinkle dust work again where, oh, Fernando Mendoza had turnover issues at Cal? Boom, not anymore. Does Josh Hoover still have these same turnover issues that, he's led the Big 12 in turnovers the last couple of years, or last year particularly? Does that suddenly go away around the Indiana infrastructure, or are they going to be dealing with some more challenges that they didn't have a year ago? And kind of how does that, go with Signetti's just ability to adapt? And again, his talent evaluation and development has just been supreme from what we've seen thus far.
Michigan State dealt with that a decade ago with Mark D'Antonio, and it was coming off of that great run with Connor Cook. And then all of a sudden it was like, hey, Michigan State doesn't have to recruit these three
And they
stars
got some of
anymore.
those 4 and 5 stars who were just kind of bums.
And it just blew up in their face. And it just ended up being the beginning of the end for one of the most successful coaches of the Big Ten in the 21st century. And it ended up being like, hey, just be careful, like how you evaluate talent, like how you take shortcuts. And I'm sure that there are some warning signs there just for Indiana in this next phase. Last one for you, Jesse. Team of the decade is still very much up for grabs in the 2020s. Georgia, I think, can claim it with a third title. History shows us if you win 3 titles in a decade, that's yours. But Ohio State, Indiana, very much in play. Alabama, Michigan don't feel as imminent, but still, I think, in the running for that title. Who would be your pick to claim that by the end of 2029?
So are we gonna? I think as we sit here today, it would be hard to argue that it's not Georgia when you've won 2 national championships, including the second one in the most ridiculously dominating fashion. Just a splattering of historic proportions. Then you on the heels of that, then it's disappointing, but they've won the SEC back to back years. I do kind of want to choose your Indiana Hoosiers though, just because of it was such an historical outlier to do what he did year one, where it's like, all right, we'll build you a statue. Oh no, we're going to follow that up by going 16-0, just curb stomping most opponents on a weekly basis, and then capping it with a national championship. I think if Indiana wins 10 games another 2 years, let's say two more times, in the next couple seasons, I think they could claim, just because it was such an
Wow.
outlier thing, that like they were the team of the decade.
Your words, not mine.
Because I mean, like, hey, what was more impressive, what Indiana did in back-to-back years, or Michigan? I know Michigan beat Ohio State a couple of times, but then when you add all the other nonsense around it, the fact that it's kind of become such a face palm with everything, with the fallout of the Jim Harbaugh era and the Sharon Moore mess and all that. I mean, so they got one national title. Indiana's got one national title. The way Indiana did it seems a lot more fun.
It certainly seems like there's going to be a lot less to dissect, a lot less to figure out. As for Michigan, where you look back on that entire coaching staff, you're like, wait a minute, all right, so Jesse Minter was good. Harbaugh,
Right.
yeah, all right, but yeah, other than that, it's going to be really hard for a team like Michigan to claim that title. But Ohio State, if you were doing the betting odds, would probably be the most intriguing to be able to get there. This year will probably be really telling with Julian saying what he's able to do. But a fascinating discussion. And to think that we're, at the 60% mark through the 2020s. And I think it's still very much up for grabs is certainly interesting in this
I
era
think
of college
Alabama's
football.
got the likelihood of having a new head coach or two than
Mm,
being the team of the decade.
yeah, that's one that for our vacancy question, that certainly could end up being the answer. And look,
I think
I've
it's been
defended
20
DeBoer.
years. I think it's been 20 years. I looked up 19 or 20 years that they've had a win total as low as 8.5. Preseason win total is 8.5.
Is that right? 2007 would have been the last one that would have been that
Yep.
low, I assume.
Yep. 19. Yeah. 19 years
Golly.
ago. Saban's first year.
Different times, different times. Everyone go subscribe to the Surrender Cobra on Substack. Jesse, thanks, man. Do it again real soon.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Counter.